Selwick's hands were too clean. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the missing grain, not the short-counted salt stores, not the 3 barrels of smoked fish that had vanished between the harbor and the cellar. Selwick's hands. A quartermaster who personally inspected every shipment, who swore he carried and stacked and counted each sack himself, should have had the rough, cracked hands of a man who worked. Selwick's were smooth, soft at the knuckle, ink-stained only at the fingertips where he held his quill. I am Calder, Alpha King of Crestmore, and I have ruled this wind-swept fortress on the cliffs for 7 years. My kingdom is gray stone and salt wind, the crash of the sea against the rocks below, the smell of brine and heather carried through every corridor. Crestmore is not a gentle place. It does not forgive softness, and it does not tolerate thieves. "The Wraith again, my lord," Selwick said, standing in the doorway of my study with a ledger pressed to his chest. 3 sacks of barley, gone in the night. "The Wraith," I repeated. "The scavenger woman, the one who lives in the caves below the south cliff." He shook his head with the kind of weariness that men perform when they want you to believe they've tried everything. "I've warned her. The sentries have warned her. She takes what she wants and disappears before dawn." I looked at his hands again, then at the ledger. "Leave it with me." He hesitated, just a flicker, quickly covered. "Of course, my lord." When he left, I opened the ledger and began to count. The shortages had started 8 months ago. Small at first, a sack of oats here, a cask of dried meat there. Selwick had blamed whether rats, spoilage, and then when those excuses thinned, he had offered a name, the Wraith, a woman. No one seemed to know her real name, or if they did, they had forgotten it. She lived somewhere below the cliffs, in the tide caves the fishermen called the Shallows. She scavenged the shore after storms. She appeared at the midden heap behind the kitchens at dawn, picking through what the cooks discarded. Elder Torv, who ran my domestic wing with an iron grip, had called her a disgrace, a stray who should have been driven off years ago. "She takes from the midden," Torv had said, her mouth thin with distaste. "But she takes from the stores, too. Selwick has proof. I had let it go for too long. That was my fault. Crestmore had other problems, a border dispute with the Ashenmore pact to the north, a collapsed bridge on the eastern trade road, my own wolf's worsening temper. For 2 years my wolf had been savage, restless, pacing behind my ribs like something caged. He snarled at my advisors. He refused to settle at night. My healers said it was grief. My father had died 3 years ago, and wolves mourned long. But it didn't feel like mourning. It felt like waiting, like something was pulling at him and he couldn't find the direction. I closed the ledger. The numbers were wrong. Not in the way Selwick claimed, not the clean subtraction of a thief taking 3 sacks at a time. The errors were layered, spread across months, buried in adjusted tallies and rewritten margins. Someone had been changing the numbers after the fact, and it wasn't a woman who scavenged the shore at dawn. But I wanted to see her anyway. The Wraith. If she existed, I wanted to know what she was doing in my caves with my stolen stores, or Selwick's stolen stores, depending on what I found. I took the cliff path alone at dusk. The south cliff of Crestmore drops 300 feet to the sea. The path is cut into the rock, narrow, slick with spray, the kind of walk that kills a careless man. I am not a careless man. I went down in the gray light with the wind flattening my cloak against my back and the taste of salt on my teeth. Below me, the tide was pulling out, leaving the dark mouths of the shallows exposed. A network of caves carved by centuries of water, their floors still wet, their ceilings dripping. I smelled her before I found her, not the stink of a thief's den, something else. Brine and heather and a warmth beneath both like sun on old stone. A clean smell, a cared-for smell. My wolf stopped pacing. He didn't go still, that would suggest he simply paused. He lay down, flat, belly to the stone of my chest, and he breathed. One long, slow breath, the first in 2 years that didn't rattle with restlessness. I almost stumbled on the cliff path. I had to brace my hand against the wet rock and stand there, breathing with him because I didn't know what it meant. I only knew that it had never happened before. I followed the scent. The cave was larger than I expected, a high-ceilinged grotto where the tide had carved the stone into something almost graceful, pillars and shelves and a floor of smooth, washed rock. Driftwood burned in a pit near the center, the smoke curling up through a natural chimney in the stone. There were pallets along the walls, rough, made of dried seagrass and salvaged cloth. And on those pallets around the fire, curled against the walls and sprawled across every surface. Wolves. I counted 9 before I stopped counting. 3 were adults, lean, scarred, one missing half an ear. The rest were pups, small ones, some barely old enough to walk. One had a splinted foreleg, the binding clean and tight. Another slept in a nest of torn wool, its fur patchy with the remnants of mange that someone had treated with what smelled like yarrow and rendered fat. And in the center of all of them, crouched beside the fire with a pup in her lap, was a woman. She was thin, not starved. She had muscle in her arms and steadiness in her hands, but worn the way a person gets when they feed everyone else before themselves. Her hair was dark and salt-tangled, pulled back with a strip of leather. Her dress was a patchwork of salvaged fabric, mended so many times the original cloth was unguessable. And her eyes, when she looked up and saw me, were the color of the sea in winter, gray-green, fierce, and absolutely unafraid. "You're the king," she said, not a question. "Yes." She didn't stand. The pup in her lap whimpered, and she settled her hand on its flank, a gesture so practiced, so automatic, that I knew she had done it 1,000 times. "If you've come to take them, I won't let you." I looked at the wolves. The 3 adults had lifted their heads. They watched me, not with the wariness of wild creatures, but with the calm assessment of animals who had a protector and trusted her judgment. One of them, the scarred male with the missing ear, moved closer to the woman and lay his chin on her knee. My wolf breathed again, that slow, deep breath like relief. "I haven't come to take them," I said. "I came to find a thief." "I'm not a thief." "I'm beginning to see that." She studied me for a long moment. The firelight moved across her face, and I saw what I hadn't at first, the gentleness beneath the fierceness, the way her hand never stopped its slow stroke on the pup's side, the careful tenderness with which she held the small, broken things the world had given her. "These are your pack's wolves," she said. "Every one of them. The adults were driven off, one for losing a fight, one for biting a handler who beat him, one for being too old to run the hunt. The pups were born to a she-wolf who died in the spring floods. No one claimed them. They were left in the refuse pit behind the east wall." Her voice didn't waver, but something in it hardened. "The refuse pit, newborn pups. I found them at dawn. 3 were already dead. These 6 survived because I carried them down here and fed them goat's milk through a rag for 5 weeks." I said nothing for a long time. The wind moved through the cave mouth behind me, carrying spray and the sound of the retreating tide. The wolves watched me. The woman watched me. My wolf lay quiet and still inside my chest, and for the first time in 2 years I felt something I hadn't known I'd lost, peace. "What is your name?" I asked. "Marant." "How long have you been doing this, Marin?" She looked at the wolves, then back at me. 9 years. 9 years. She had been caring for the cast-out and the abandoned in the caves beneath my fortress for 9 years, and I hadn't known. My father hadn't known. 3 sacks of barley weren't missing because a thief took them. They were missing because a woman was keeping alive what we had thrown away. "The barley," I said, "the oats, the smoked fish." "I take from the midden," she said, and there it was again, that hardness, that refusal to apologize. "What the cooks throw out, scraps, bones for broth, grain that's gone to weevil, I don't take from the stores." "Someone says you do." "Someone lies." I looked at the splinted pup, at the one recovering from mange, at the scarred adults who had been cast out for reasons that shamed my pack more than anything this woman could have done. "Yes," I said, "someone does." I climbed back up the cliff path in the dark, and my wolf didn't pace. Not once. He lay in my chest like he had found the thing he'd been turning toward for 2 years, and he simply waited. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with Selwick's ledger and 3 years of supply records spread across my desk, and I worked through them line by line. The pattern was there once you knew where to look, not 3 sacks here and there, but a steady, careful diversion of stores over 32 months. Grain, salt, smoked meat, wool, tallow, lamp oil. Always just under the threshold that would trigger a formal audit. Always attributed in Selwick's tidy hand to spoilage, whether damage or the wraith. The total, when I finished the tally near dawn, was staggering. Enough to feed a family of 4 for a decade. Enough to furnish a house, warm it through 10 winters, light it for 20. Selwick had been building himself a fortune on the backs of my people, and he had been blaming a woman who lived in a cave and fed orphaned pups with a rag. My wolf made a sound, not a growl, not a snarl, but something low and old, the kind of sound a wolf makes when he scents a threat to the den. I felt it in my throat, behind my teeth. I sent a runner at dawn, not for Selwick, not yet. For my keeper of records, a quiet man named Hale, who had served my father and owed Selwick nothing. I gave him the ledgers and told him to verify the tallies against the harbor master's shipping logs, the farmer's delivery receipts, and the kitchen's intake records. I told him to speak to no one about it. Then I went back down to the caves. Marin was at the shore when I arrived, knee-deep in the receding tide, pulling something from the rocks. She didn't hear me on the path, or if she did, she didn't turn. I stood and watched. She was prying mussels from a tidal rock, dropping them into a woven basket at her hip. The wind pressed her patchwork dress flat against her frame, and I could see the wiry strength of her, the careful economy of movement. She wasted nothing, not effort, not time, not a single muscle. When she turned and saw me, she stopped. The basket hung at her hip, dripping. The wind pulled at her hair. "I don't need your help," she said. "I didn't offer any." "Then why are you here?" A fair question. I had asked myself the same thing on the way down, and the honest answer was one I didn't fully understand yet, a pull, low and steady, behind my ribs. The scent of brine and heather and warm stone. My wolf, quiet for the first time in years, simply waiting. "I want to know about the wolves," I said. "All of them, how they came to you." She studied me with those winter-sea eyes, weighing something. Then she turned and walked toward the cave, and I followed. She told me as she cooked mussels in a battered pot over the driftwood fire, the broth thickened with sea greens she'd gathered from the rocks. The wolves gathered around her as she spoke, settling into their places with the ease of creatures who had a routine, a home, a person who would not fail them. The first had been the old wolf, the one with the scarred muzzle. His name, she said, was Salt. He'd been part of the hunting pack for 12 years before his legs slowed and the lead hunter declared him finished. They'd driven him off on a winter morning, just run him out, snapping at his heels until he understood he wasn't welcome anymore. Marin had found him on the beach 3 days later, half frozen, his hind legs locked with cold. "I was 17, she said. "I'd been living down here for 2 years already since my parents died in the gray fever. No one in the pack claimed me. I was too old for the orphanage and too young for anyone to want as a worker, or so they told me. I scavenged. I survived. And then Salt was on the beach, and he was dying, and I carried him inside and lay down beside him to warm him, and he lived." She said it simply, without drama, the way a person states a fact that changed everything. After Salt, there was a young female driven off for biting a handler who had beaten her with a rod. Then a wolf with a broken leg, left behind on a hunt because no one wanted to carry him back. Then the pups, litter after litter, born to she wolves who died or were killed, left in the cold or in the refuse because no one had time, no one had the milk, no one cared. "How many in 9 years?" I asked. "I've lost count of the ones who came and healed and left again. The ones here now, the ones who stayed, 23. 23 wolves. And the pups. 6 from the spring, 4 from last autumn who still aren't old enough to hunt on their own." She paused. "The ones who heal and go, I don't mind. They belong to the wild or they find other packs. The ones who stay, they stay because they have nowhere else." I watched Salt press his chin into her palm. He was old now, gray-muzzled, his breathing slow. But his eyes, when he looked at her, held the same steady trust I had seen in the eyes of my most loyal warriors, the ones who would die for me, not because I commanded it, but because I had earned it. "You feed 23 wolves," I said, "and pups on midden scraps and mussels. And fish I catch myself, and rabbits when I can snare them. And yes, oats from the midden when the cooks throw them out because they've gone to weevil." She looked at me, direct and unwavering. "I have never taken from the stores, not once in 9 years. I believed her, not because of the words are easy, but because of the wolves. Animals don't lie. They don't stay with someone who isn't worthy of staying with. 23 wolves and 10 pups had chosen this woman, in a cave with nothing, over a pack that had warmth and walls and food. My wolf lay still in my chest, and I felt something bloom behind my ribs, not a sharp thing, not a jolt. A warmth. Low and steady, like a banked fire that had been waiting for air, and someone had finally, after 2 long years, breathed on it. I looked at Marin, really looked at her. The way the firelight caught the angles of her face, the gentleness in her rough hands, the way she held the small pup in her lap as if it were the most precious thing in the world, because to her it was. And I knew. I didn't say it. Not then. I climbed back up the cliff path with the warmth burning steady behind my ribs and my wolf lying quiet, and I said nothing to anyone, because what I knew was too large and too important to speak before I had finished what needed finishing. Hale brought me his findings the next morning. The evidence was worse than I had calculated. Selwick hadn't just been diverting stores, he'd been selling them. A merchant in the harbor town of Creel, 3 miles down the coast, had been buying Crestmore grain and salt at a quarter of market price, and Selwick had been pocketing the difference. The arrangement had been running for almost 3 years. The total was enough to build a house, and Hale had found the house, a stone cottage on the Creel Road, furnished and stocked, registered under Selwick's sister's name. "He's been careful," Hale said, "but not careful enough. The harbor master's logs don't match his tallies by a significant margin, and the farmer delivery receipts confirm it. He's been recording less than what arrives, selling the difference, and attributing the gap to spoilage and theft." "Theft by the Wraith?" "Yes, my lord. By a woman in a cave." I dismissed Hale and sat with the knowledge for a while. My wolf was still, not the savage stillness of rage, but the focused quiet of a predator who has found the trail and knows exactly where it leads. I should have confronted Selwick then. I should have called the court, laid out the evidence, and been done with it. But something held me, not hesitation, not mercy, something else. I wanted to go back to the caves first. I wanted to see her again before the world above came crashing into whatever fragile peace she had built in the shallows. I brought supplies this time. A sack of clean oats, a parcel of dried meat, a roll of undyed wool. She was outside the cave, on the flat rock shelf above the tide line, wrapping a poultice around the foreleg of a young wolf who lay patient and still beneath her hands. She looked up when she heard my boots on the stone, and her eyes went to the sack on my shoulder. "No," she said. "It's not charity. I don't care what it is, take it back. These are my pack's wolves, wolves my pack abandoned. Feeding them is my responsibility, not yours." She paused, her hands went still on the poultice, and the young wolf whined softly, nudging her wrist. She looked at me, a long, searching look, the kind that strips a man down to whatever truth is underneath his title and his crown. "You didn't know about them," she said. "No. You should have." "Yes." She finished the poultice in silence. Then she stood, wiped her hands on her dress, and looked at the sack of oats. "Leave it by the cave mouth. The pups need it more than my pride does." Something in my chest pulled, not the bond, not yet, but the shadow of it, the shape of what was coming. I set the sack down and stayed. That was the beginning of something I don't fully have words for. I came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. I told myself it was about the wolves, I was their king, and they had been wronged under my watch. But the truth was simpler and harder. It was her. It was the way she moved through that cave like a woman who had built a world from nothing and would defend it against anything. It was the way the wolves followed her, not with the obedience of trained animals, but with the devotion of creatures who had been saved and knew it. I brought oats, and she distributed them without waste. I brought wool, and she used it to line the pups' sleeping pallets. I brought a gutting knife with a good edge, and she accepted it with a nod that was the closest thing to gratitude I had ever seen on her face. "You could come up to the fortress," I said one evening, watching her feed the pups, 6 of them, crowding around a shallow dish of warm milk she'd stretched with water and a handful of grain. "I could find you a place, proper walls, a hearth." "I have walls." She gestured at the cave around us, stone, dripping, beautiful in the firelight. "I have a hearth. You have a hole in a cliff." "It's my hole in a cliff." I almost smiled, almost. "You're stubborn." "I'm alive, so are they," she nodded at the pups. "That's what stubborn gets you." I watched the smallest pup, the one with the splinted leg, try to climb into the dish of milk and fall over sideways. Marin caught it without looking, righted it gently, and set it back on its feet. The pup wagged its tail and tried again. My wolf stirred, not restlessness, something softer, a sound like a sigh deep in my chest. I felt the warmth behind my ribs pulse, and I thought, this is what I've been turning toward. For 2 years, while my wolf paced and snarled and couldn't settle, he was pointing here. Toward this cave, this woman, these wolves that the world threw away and she caught. I didn't say it, I didn't have to. The bond was building itself brick by quiet brick, and it didn't need my permission. But time was moving above us. I returned to the fortress that night to find Selwick waiting outside my study. His face was composed, but something twitched at the corner of his mouth. A small, involuntary betrayal. "My lord, I need to speak with you about the Wraith." "Sit down." He sat, he crossed his legs, folded his hands, and presented me with a new grievance. A patrol had seen the woman carrying a bundle up from the shore in the pre-dawn, and Selwick was certain it was stolen tallow from the rendering shed. He wanted permission to arrest her and bring her before the court for formal banishment. "Banishment," I said. "She's a thief, my lord. She's been stealing from the pack for years. The evidence is clear. Every shortage in my ledgers corresponds to a sighting of her near the stores." "Your ledgers?" "Yes, my lord, my records, which I keep faithfully." I looked at his clean, smooth hands. I looked at his face, handsome, earnest, the mask of a man who had practiced sincerity until it fit like a second skin. "I'll consider it," I said. "Bring the matter before the court at the next session, 3 days from now." He blinked. He hadn't expected agreement. He'd expected resistance, argument, a delay he could use to maneuver. The quick compliance unsettled him. "Thank you, my lord," he said and left. I waited until his footsteps faded down the corridor. Then I sent for Hale. 3 days, I said. I want every document, every receipt, every shipping log organized and ready, and I want the merchant in Creel brought to Crestmore under guard, quietly. "Yes, my lord." I went to the window. The moon was up, and the sea below the cliffs was silver and black, the tide coming in. Somewhere down there, in a cave lit by driftwood, a woman was feeding wolves that my pack had thrown away, and she didn't know that the man who'd been framing her was about to try to destroy her in front of everyone. My wolf rose not in fury, in resolve, the quiet, absolute kind, the kind that moves mountains. I went back to the caves the next morning. Marin was sitting at the cave mouth, mending a fishing net by the pale light. Salt lay at her feet, his scarred muzzle resting on her ankle. The pups were tumbling over each other near the fire pit, and the young wolf with the healing foreleg was standing, tentatively, favoring the leg but standing, and watching the pups with what I would have sworn was amusement. "The quartermaster is going to bring charges against you," I said, "in 3 days before the court." Marin's hands went still on the net. She didn't look up. "For what?" "Theft from the pack stores. He wants you banished." Silence. The tide moved outside, the rhythmic wash and pull of water on rock. Salt lifted his head and pressed his nose against her knee. "I've never taken from the stores," she said. Her voice was even, but her hands gripped the net, and I saw the whiteness of her knuckles. "I know." She looked up. "Then why are you telling me this instead of stopping him?" "Because I am going to stop him, but I need you to come to the Long Hall when I send for you." "I haven't been in the Long Hall since I was a child." "I know. Will you come?" She looked at the wolves, at Salt, old and steady at her feet, at the pups, tumbling unaware, at the young wolf standing on his healing leg, watching her the way all of them watched her with trust that had been earned in the hardest possible way. "If I come," she said, "they come with me." I almost told her that wasn't possible. Wolves in the long hall in front of the court, the elders, the whole pack, it would be chaos. It would be unprecedented. My wolf lay in my chest, quiet and certain, and I heard myself say, "Good." She watched me for a long moment, then nodded once and went back to her net. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Hale had the documents ready, the real ledgers, the harbor master's logs, the farmer's receipts, and the testimony of the merchant from Creel, who had been persuaded that honesty was preferable to complicity. Elder Torv, when I spoke to her privately, went white at the scope of Selwick's theft. "I believed him," she said. "About the woman, I believed every word." "So did I for too long." "What will you do?" "What a king does when he discovers a rot in his own house. I cut it out." Torv looked at me, a sharp, assessing look. She had known me since I was a child, and she didn't soften her words for the crown. "And the woman, the one in the caves." "What about her?" "You've been going down there every day, Calder. The sentries talk. Your wolf is calm for the first time in 2 years. I'm old, not blind." I didn't answer. She didn't push. But she watched me leave with something in her eyes that might have been the beginning of understanding. The night before the court session, I couldn't sleep. I stood at the window of my chamber and looked at the sea, and my wolf lay in my chest with that steady, patient warmth, and I let myself think about what was coming. I had been king for 7 years. I had been fair, I had been just. I had kept my borders, fed my people, resolved their disputes with as much wisdom as I could gather. But I had missed this, a woman in a cave beneath my feet, keeping alive what I had let die. Wolves abandoned, pups discarded, a loyal creature like Salt thrown out because he was too old to be useful. and a quartermaster stealing from the pack while he pointed his clean, smooth hands at the one person who was doing the work he should have been doing. That shamed me, not the kind of shame that destroys, the kind that clarifies, the kind that tells a man exactly what he owes and to whom. I owed Marin not charity, not rescue, something larger and harder to name. The bond pulsed behind my ribs, low, steady, unmistakable. My wolf breathed, slow and deep, and for the first time I let myself feel the full weight of what he had been trying to tell me for 2 years. She was the one, the mate I hadn't searched for because I thought the searching would come with trumpets and moonlight and the formality of the old ceremonies. It hadn't. It had come with the smell of brine and heather, with a woman's rough hands on a splinted pup, with 23 wolves and 10 orphaned pups in a tied cave, and with my wolf lying down inside me for the first time since my father died, because he had found the thing he'd been pulling toward. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone of the window frame and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would set things right. The long hall of Crestmore is built of gray granite, the same stone as the cliffs it sits upon. The ceiling is vaulted, held up by pillars carved with wolf heads, my father's work and his father's before him. In the mornings, the light comes through the high eastern windows in long, pale shafts, catching the dust and the salt haze that never fully leaves the air. It is a room built for judgment, and it has seen its share. The court assembled at the 9th hour. The pack filled the gallery, warriors, hunters, fishermen, craftspeople, the kitchen staff, the stable hands. Elder Torv sat at the front with the other council members. Hale stood to my left, a leather case of documents at his feet. Selwick entered with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He was dressed well, better than a quartermaster should be, but no one had questioned it before, and he was banking on no one questioning it now. He bowed to me, took his place before the court, and laid his case against Marin with practiced, persuasive precision. The Wraith, he said, had been stealing from the pack stores for years. He had documented every shortage, tracked every sighting, warned every patrol. She was a vagrant, a scavenger, a drain on the pack's resources. She had no standing, no family, no claim. He asked respectfully that she be formally banished from Crestmore's territory and barred from returning. He spoke well, his voice was measured, his evidence neatly organized, his righteous concern convincing. When he finished, several of the pack members were nodding. Elder Torv was not, but she held her expression still as I had asked her to. "Thank you, Selwick," I said. "Is that the whole of your evidence?" "It is, my lord." "Then I'll present mine." His face changed. It was subtle, a slight tightening around the eyes, a fractional stiffness in the jaw, but I had been watching for it, and I saw it clearly. I gestured to Hale, who opened the leather case and began laying documents on the table before the court. One by one, ledger against shipping log, Selwick's recorded deliveries against the harbor master's actual receipts, the gap between what arrived at Crestmore and what Selwick claimed arrived, the pattern of sales to the Creel merchant, the dates, the quantities, the prices, the payments traced to an account held in his sister's name. The hall went quiet, not the quiet of attention, the quiet of shock. The kind that starts at the edges and moves inward, person by person, as understanding spreads. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I laid out each piece of evidence as Hale handed it to me, and I let the numbers speak. 3 years of theft, hundreds of sacks of grain, barrels of salt, casks of smoked meat. A stone cottage on the Creel Road, furnished and warm, paid for with what belonged to every person in this hall. And in place of an explanation, I said, our quartermaster offered a name, the Wraith, a woman living in the caves below the South Cliff, scavenging midden scraps. Every shortage, every missing sack, every vanished barrel, blamed on a woman with no voice in this court, and no one to speak for her. Selwick's composure cracked. Not all at once, it went in stages like a wall losing stones. First the hands, clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then the color, draining from his face until he was the gray of Crestmore stone. Then the eyes, darting to the exits, to the crowd, to me. This is, my lord, this is a misunderstanding. The records, I can explain the discrepancies. You can explain a house in Creel registered to your sister, purchased with the proceeds of grain sold below market to a merchant who is currently in my guardroom and eager to cooperate. Silence. I let it sit. The hall held its breath. I could feel my wolf, low and steady in my chest, the resolve burning like the banked fire behind my ribs. Selwick, you will step down as quartermaster. Your accounts are seized. The house in Creel is forfeit. You will face the council for sentencing at a later date. I paused. And you will never speak the word wraith in this hall again. Two of my guards stepped forward and took his arms. He went without fighting. The fight had left him when the Creel merchant's name came out of my mouth. But his face, as they led him past the gallery, was the face of a man who had built a careful lie for 3 years and watched it collapse in 3 minutes. I waited until the door closed behind him. Then I turned to the court. "There is someone I'd like you to meet," I said. "Someone this pack owes a debt it doesn't yet understand." I nodded to the guard at the side entrance. The door opened. Maren walked in. She was wearing the same patchwork dress. She didn't own another. Her hair was pulled back with the strip of leather. Her hands were rough, her frame thin, her boots worn to the sole. She looked like exactly what the pack had always believed her to be. A scavenger, a nobody, a woman who belonged to the caves and the shore and the margins of the world. But she didn't walk in alone. Salt came first. The old wolf, gray-muzzled and scarred, walked at her right side with the steady dignity of a creature who had survived everything the world could throw at him. Behind him came the young female who'd been driven off for biting the handler who beat her head up, her step sure, her eyes clear. Behind her, the wolf with the healed broken leg, walking strong. And behind them, spilling through the door in a quiet flood of fur and bright eyes and wagging tails. The pups. 6 from the spring, 4 from the autumn. 10 small wolves tumbling over each other's feet, sniffing at the stone floor of the long hall, bumping into the legs of the gallery benches, and looking up with the boundless curiosity of creatures who had never been in a room this big. The smallest one, the one with the splinted foreleg, now healed, the splint removed just yesterday, trotted directly to Maren and pressed its nose against her ankle. The hall went still. I watched their faces, the hunters who had driven Salt off on a winter morning, the handler whose rod had driven the young female to bite, the pack members who had left pups in the refuse pit and called it no one's problem. They were looking at the wolves, alive, healthy, calm, devoted, and they were beginning to understand. "This woman," I said, and my voice carried in the silence, "has spent 9 years in the caves beneath this fortress caring for every wolf this pack cast away, every pup left in the cold, every wounded creature driven off. She nursed them. She fed them with midden scraps and mussels and fish she caught with her own hands. She kept them alive when we did not, and for 9 years we called her a thief." No one spoke. Salt stood at Maren's side, his chin level, his scarred face turned toward the pack that had once thrown him out. The pups milled around her feet, warm and alive and impossible to deny. Maren stood still. She didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't look at me for rescue. She stood in the center of the long hall in her mendied dress with her wolves around her, and she waited, and she was the most dignified person in the room. My wolf rose in my chest, not savage, not snarling. He rose the way a wolf rises when he sees his mate and knows, with the certainty of blood and bone and everything that runs deeper than thought, that she is the one. The warmth behind my ribs blazed, and I felt it spread through my whole body, down my arms, into my hands, and I knew that if I touched her now, the bond would seal. The mark would come. The thing my wolf had been turning toward for 2 years would arrive, and nothing in the world would undo it. I stepped down from the dais. The hall watched, every eye, every wolf, every person. I walked across the stone floor to where Maren stood with Salt at her side and the pups at her feet, and I stopped in front of her. She looked up at me. Those Wintersea eyes, steady and fierce and uncertain for the first time since I'd met her, uncertain not because she doubted herself, but because she didn't know what I was about to do, and she had learned, in 9 years of being cast aside, not to expect kindness from the pack above. "Maren," I said. I held out my hand, palm up open, an offer, not a command. She looked at it, she looked at me. The hall was silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. "You don't have to," I said, low enough that only she could hear. "This is your choice. Everything from this moment is your choice." She searched my face. I don't know what she found there. I only know what I felt, which was the full, certain, overwhelming truth of the bond, steady and warm and patient, waiting for her answer the way my wolf had waited for 2 years. Not demanding, not seizing, waiting. She put her hand in mine. The mark came. Not on the wrist, that was the stories, the old songs. This one bloomed across our palms where they pressed together. A warmth that began at the center and spread outward, and with it a light, not blinding, not theatrical, but steady and golden, like the first light of morning coming through the cave mouth and touching the sea. I felt it seal, felt the bond close like a door locking, like a key turning, like the last line of a story that had been waiting to be finished. My wolf breathed, one long, deep, slow breath, and in it I heard everything, the 2 years of restlessness, the pacing, the snarling, the savage need to find the thing he couldn't name. It was her. It had always been her. He had been pulling toward a woman in a cave who fed orphaned pups with a rag and never asked anyone for anything, and now he had found her and he was still. Marin's eyes widened. She felt it too. I could see it in the way her breath caught, in the way her fingers tightened around mine, in the way her whole body went still and then softened, like someone setting down a weight they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it wasn't part of them. "I named this woman before the court," I said, and my voice was steady, though the bond was singing in my blood. "Marin, my fated mate, Luna of Crestmore, and every wolf she saved stands witness." Salt lifted his head and howled. It was an old wolf's howl, thin, cracked, but carrying. The young female joined him, then the wolf with the healed leg, then the adults I hadn't met yet, the ones who'd stayed in the cave, who must have followed when Marin walked out. I saw them now, gathered at the hall's side entrance, their eyes on her, their voices rising. And the pups tried. 10 small voices, yipping and howling in broken, earnest, off-key chorus, and the sound of it, the sheer, undeniable sound of 23 wolves and 10 pups howling for the woman who had saved them, broke something open in the hall. I saw the hunter who had driven Salt away lower his head. I saw the handler who had beaten the young female close his eyes. I saw Elder Torv press her hand to her mouth, and I saw the tears on her lined cheeks, and I did not look away. Marin stood beside me with the bond mark glowing gold on our joined palms, and she did not bow, and she did not weep, and she did not thank me. She looked at the wolves, her wolves, every one of them alive because she had refused to let them die, and she held my hand, and she was the Luna of Crestmore. The pack knelt, not because I commanded it. One by one, starting with Elder Torv and moving through the gallery like a wave, they went to their knees. Some in shame, some in awe, some in the particular silence of people who are realizing they have been wrong about something fundamental for a very long time. Selwick's name was not spoken again in the long hall. The records showed the truth, and the truth was enough. He was sentenced by the council a week later, stripped of his rank, his stolen gains returned to the pack, his cottage in Creel given to a family of fishermen whose nets had been lost in a storm. He left Crestmore's territory on a gray morning, carrying nothing, and no one watched him go. There are things I could tell you about the weeks that followed, about the room in the fortress that Marin refused for 3 days before agreeing that the pups, at least, deserved a warm floor, about the way Salt took to sleeping outside my study door as if he had always belonged there, about the morning I woke to find the smallest pup, the one with the once splinted foreleg, asleep on my pillow with its nose pressed against my jaw. I could tell you about Elder Torv bringing Marin a dress, a real one, deep blue wool, lined with soft linen, and Marin accepting it with a nod and then hemming it shorter herself so she could still climb the cliff path. About the first time Marin stood beside me at the morning court and said, quietly but clearly, that the refuse pits behind the east wall needed to be closed because no living creature should be discarded there. About the way my counsel looked at her, this thin, fierce woman in her blue wool dress, and nodded. I could tell you about the bond, the way it settled between us like something that had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. Not a fire, a hearth. Steady, warm, banked against the cold. The way my wolf lay quiet inside me, content for the first time in years, and the way I would catch myself reaching for her hand across the council table, or pausing in a corridor because I could smell her, brine and heather and warm stone, from 3 rooms away. But the thing I want you to know, the thing that matters more than any of it, is this. On a quiet evening a month after the court, I went looking for Marin and found her in the cave, not because she had left, she hadn't. She had simply gone back, as she did most evenings, to check on the wolves who still sheltered there. Some had moved up to the fortress. Some preferred the shallows. Marin kept both doors open and never forced the choice. She was sitting by the old fire pit, cross-legged, with the smallest pup in her lap, the one with the foreleg. It had healed clean, he ran now, fast and sure, and he was growing into a fine young wolf with a coat the color of winter dusk. But in the evenings, he still climbed into her lap like he was 5 weeks old and dying in a refuse pit, and she still held him like he was the most precious thing in the world. I sat down beside her. The cave was quiet. Just the sound of the tide, the breathing of wolves, the crackle of the driftwood fire she still kept burning even though there was a hearth in the fortress with her name on it. "You could have had any woman in the kingdom," she said, not looking at me. Her hand moved slowly over the pup's flank. "Any Luna, someone who fit." "You fit." "I lived in a cave, Calder." "You built a world in a cave. You kept alive what the rest of us let die. You fed 23 wolves on mussels and midden scraps, and every one of them would walk through fire for you." I looked at her hand on the pup's fur, the roughness of her fingers, the gentleness in them. "I didn't choose you because you fit what I expected. I chose you because you were the thing I didn't know I was looking for." She was quiet for a moment. The pup yawned, a wide, luxurious yawn, the yawn of a creature that has never known fear, and pressed its nose into her palm. "He's going to be big," she said. "Look at his paws." I looked at his paws. They were enormous. "He's going to be trouble," I said. "The best kind." She leaned her shoulder against mine, and Salt settled at our feet with a long sigh, and the tide came in and went out again, and the fire burned low, and the wolves breathed in the dark around us. "I am the Alpha King of Crestmore. I have ruled for 7 years, and I will rule for many more, with a Luna who keeps the door open for every cast-out creature and never lets me forget what matters. My pack does not throw wolves away anymore. My pups are not left in refuse pits. And when my wolf stirs in my chest, it is not with restlessness or rage. It is with the steady, quiet warmth of a creature who has found the thing he spent 2 years turning toward and will never lose it again. The smallest pup is no longer small. He is the largest wolf in Crestmore now, broad-shouldered and fearless, and he still sleeps at her feet every night. She still smells like brine and heather and warm stone. And my wolf still lies down when she walks into the room,